No training camp needed. The Sacramento Kings have made their decision on their backup bigs. And now with one of the major storylines gone, what training camp storylines should we be paying attention to come early October? We'll discuss right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time. Time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all offseason long. And today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That's Jase medical.com. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter at ABC 10 News. That sounds a little bit different. I'll explain that later on in the show. And yes, we are getting ready for the start of training camp. And one of the major storylines, in fact, for many of us, the main storyline, at least when it comes to positional battles in training camp, was the backup big spot, right? The Kings, as of a couple days ago, were planning on entering training camp, or at least we expected the Kings to enter training camp with, of course, Domantas Sabonis already established as the starting 5. And we think Trey Lyles is the primary backup 5, despite being more of a 4. But there were 4 other centers, Alex Len, Nerlens Noel, JaVale McGee, and Neemias Queta, that all were at least under contract, that were going to be duking it out for at least 1, probably 2 backup center spots on the roster. Well, we're not getting that training camp battle because the Sacramento Kings don't even need to spend their time on that training camp battle. Basically, as soon as JaVale McGee came available from the Dallas Mavericks, being waived by the Mavericks, the Kings went, scooped him up, actually convinced him to join Sacramento instead of going and returning with the Golden State Warriors, according to some reports. And I think that has to do completely with Mike Brown, who McGee worked with in his time when he was winning championships with the Golden State Warriors not too long ago. The fact that McGee would choose to join Mike Brown and the Kings over the Golden State Warriors, I think speaks absolute volumes to not just Mike as a coach, but also what the Sacramento Kings are doing and where the Sacramento Kings are headed. But as soon as the Kings landed McGee, I think it was pretty well known that one of those backup 5 center roster spots was going to go to JaVale. And then was there going to be a 3-man battle for the other one? If there was going to be that battle, Alex Len seemed to be the front runner. Clearly, the Kings were not surprising anybody. And they felt pretty confident enough to just say, you know what? We're not going to do a training camp battle. JaVale McGee, Alex Len, you are the 2 backup centers that we're going to have on our roster coming into the regular season. And Nerlens Noel, Neemias Queta, thank you for your services. Here's $300,000 and $250,000. You didn't even have to show up to training camp because of the deals that you signed earlier this offseason. Good luck, and hopefully this gives you enough time to pursue opportunities elsewhere. The Kings made their decision, and it's the right decision. It's the decision that makes the most sense. Now, maybe there still could have been a training camp battle. Maybe you could have kept those 2 guys around. But the likelihood of either of them beating out Alex Len and JaVale McGee, especially JaVale, that wasn't going to happen. And the fact that you have JaVale McGee makes Nerlens Noel almost, unnecessary. So maybe some people would have liked to see the Kings say goodbye to Noel, just waive him or cut him and let him go and pay him his $300,000, but still bring Queta in to give Queta a chance. However, part of this report, part of the reason for this Sacramento Kings decision for cutting both those guys, especially Neemias Queta, is hopefully it gives them a true opportunity to pursue a roster spot elsewhere. And that's important with Neemias Queta because Queta did not want another 2-way contract. He didn't. He spent 2 years with the Stockton Kings on a 2-way deal. Neemias Queta is looking for a true roster contract and a true roster spot in the NBA. That's what he's searching for. The odds were stacked heavily against him in Sacramento to a point where it was a pretty much certainty that he was not going to make the team over the other 2 guys. So the Kings did him a solid by paying him the $250,000 that was guaranteed in the deal that he signed a couple weeks ago and saying, all right, here's your money. go out and try and get a training camp invite elsewhere and try and make a roster elsewhere where you might have a better shot. That optically looks good for the Sacramento Kings. It's the Kings doing right by Queta. The Kings, I guess, also doing right by Nerlens Noel. What an easy paycheck, right? To be paid $250,000 or $300,000 for just signing a piece of paper and not having to actually show up and compete for a spot. Give me that deal. Monty, you can cut me. Mike, you can cut me. I'll sign the dotted line. I'll sign for $100,000 right now, and you could rip the contract up in front of me and say you're cut 5 seconds later. You could do it on national television, embarrass me for all I care. Give me that money. That's an easy payday. But as much as the optics are important and it does look good and the Kings are trying to do those guys a favor, specifically Neemias Queta a favor, let's not pretend that that's not the primary reason why they made this decision. Mike Brown does not have time to waste on an unnecessary position battle if he knows he has his guys already here, right? Training camp, even though it feels like forever for us as fans when we're anxiously waiting for Kings basketball and we're desperately just trying to get through the preseason, because as good as it is to have actual basketball in front of us, preseason basketball sucks compared to the regular season, right? It might feel like a long, dragged-out period for us, but for Mike Brown, for the Sacramento Kings, who are trying to use that time where they're finally legally able to come together as a team and start practicing as a team and preparing for the regular season, I imagine that time goes by like that, right? Look at Mike Brown's practice schedule already. Mike Brown already has some of the most, if not the most, practice days during the regular season of any head coach, period, because he thinks his teams and the Kings specifically need that time in order to improve, in order to get better. So Mike does not want to waste a day, 2 days, 3 days, a week of training camp, or even 20 minutes of a session, a training camp session, even if they're doing 2 days. Who knows? He doesn't want to waste that time seeing if maybe Nerlens Noel or maybe Neemias Queta could beat out Alex Len. He doesn't want to waste time on a long shot. He doesn't need to, because everything for this training camp is about adding that next layer of Kings basketball on top of the very solid foundation that the Sacramento Kings built for themselves last year. It's all about the next step. Now, there are still going to be review sessions, I'm sure. They're going to revisit concepts from last season, refreshers for players that were already here, introductions of Kings basketball to guys like Sasha Vezenkov and Chris Duarte and Colby Jones and some of the new Kings on this roster. Sure, there's going to be that. It's not just day one, here's new stuff on top of the old. And I'm sure, plus, individual work and Kings players have been working with each other on their own time over the course of the offseason as well. So I'm sure there are already elements of refreshers and things like that have already been going on all summer long. But the Kings want to hit the ground running as much as possible. Mike Brown wants to spend as much time as he possibly can during training camp and during preseason, again, adding that next layer, building upon what the Sacramento Kings built for themselves or where they left off at the end of last season and at the end of the playoffs. So really, to me, like, there's going to be multiple focuses to training camp. The first focus to me is implementing Sasha Vezenkov, Chris Duarte, and the new guys, but in particular, Vezenkov. Like, you are someone who we expect to have a very heavy impact on this Kings team. We expect you to get big minutes right away as a rotational player. That doesn't mean like 35 minutes a night. It means like 15, 20, sometimes 25 minutes a night as like that rotational guy. Want Vezenkov to plug right into what the Kings are doing and get him comfortable with the Kings offense. It's implementing those guys as a focus. Another primary focus of training camp is absolutely going to be somewhat addressing how the Golden State Warriors stopped Sacramento's offense, or at least limited Sacramento's offense in the playoffs. You're not hyper-focusing on that to the point where you ignore other things because you're so concerned about the way the Warriors defended you. But other teams clearly paid attention to how the Warriors at least slowed the Kings down offensively in the playoffs last year, when very few teams, if any, were able to do that to the Kings during the regular season. So the Kings do need to address the dribble handoff game being taken away so easily. Domantas Sabonis being isolated in like on the elbow or in mid-range jumpers, deep mid-range, sometimes at the top of the key. Like, they do need to address things like that. So I expect that to somewhat be a focus, in addition to ultimately improving the offense, or at the very least, getting the offense as close to the same as it was in mid-season form as early as possible. Because as important as defense is this season, and there is going to be a renewed effort to obviously improve defensively, we believe this offense is naturally going to be very, very, very good. Defensively, it's like if the Kings could become a middle-of-the-pack defensive team, like the Denver Nuggets last season were the 15th offense in the NBA, dead center, middle of the pack. They still won a championship, so the Kings don't need to suddenly become a top 10 defensive team in order to get where they want to go. Of course, they're going to work during training camp to improve their defense. They're going to work on team defensive concepts, individual defensive concepts. They're not just going to ignore that, but they're not going to hyper-focus on defense to the potential expense of the offense. I think it's going to be more of a focus for this team to fine-tune and reestablish that offensive presence that they have and get the newcomers comfortable in that offense, maybe add on to that offense a little bit, add some things that other teams haven't seen before so the Kings aren't so understandable, I suppose, or aren't as repetitive as they were last year with the way they played on the offensive end. That's still going to be a focus, and then you're going to implement team defense philosophies and work on the team defense, of course, implementing different elements of that as training camp goes on. At least this is how I would believe the correct way to handle it for the Sacramento Kings is bring that along without completely, like the one thing I don't think the Sacramento Kings will do and should do is, let's say if it's broken up in a percentage, 65% of training camp is focused on the defense and the other 35% is like, we're so good on offense, we're going to be fine, right? We'll play with the offense a little bit and work with the offense a little bit, but for the most part, we're going to be defense in training camp. While that seems like it makes sense for a team that was as good offensively and bad defensively as the Kings were last year, I think that could be more detrimental than it could be helpful. To me, if I'm the Kings, I'm focusing on reestablishing the offense, getting the newcomers comfortable in that offense, and then easing in and implementing different defensive focuses and philosophies over the course of training camp. But now that the big man battle is gone, what are the main training camp storylines that we should be paying attention to? I got 4 of them for you. 4 of these storylines from training camp. Some of them will, probably all 4 of them won't really surprise you, but all 4 of them are definitely worth focusing on. I'll share with you those 4 storylines in just a second after I tell you more about our new sponsor here of the Locked On Kings podcast. That's Jase Medical. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jase Medical offers the Jase Case. The Jase Case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you a peace of mind so that you are not just hoping that you have access to medication when you need it. Jase Medical makes sure you have the medication in hand. Jase Medical is simple. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Don't get caught unprepared. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com, promo code LOCKEDON. All right, the 4 main storylines that we should be paying attention to now heading into training camp. Number 1, this is the one that I'm most excited for. This is the one where I'm hoping, I'm asking for too much here. I'm hoping that Mike Brown lets us in a little bit earlier into training camp this year, and I'm talking about us media members, than they did last year. Because typically, last year, rarely we'd see scrimmages, but really we'd see a lot of like free throw shooting drills and individual work and things like that when they would let us in. And of course, they don't want to tip off to the media or tip off to anybody like this. We're never going to see walkthroughs of defensive and offensive philosophies and things like that. We're never going to see that. But what I want to see, which I think is the number 1 storyline for Kings training camp, is rotations and lineup combinations. We know who the starting 5 are going to be. We think we know who the bench, certainly 4, probably 5, are going to be. The top 9 to top 10 of this roster is pretty set in stone. And we won't be shocked at all to see the same starting five out there, to see Malik Monk in that six-man role. But we know Mike Brown likes to stagger his lineups, right? I mean, hell, De'Aaron Fox was the first guy that he would sub out of games in order to stagger his lineups and maximize the time of having at least one of Fox or Sabonis on the floor at all times last season and getting different pairings and combinations out there, right? He had a very versatile lineup, which worked in his favor, especially on the offensive end of the floor. Now with the implementation of guys like Sasha Vezenkov, what do those pairings look like? Are we going to see Vezenkov and Sabonis? Are we going to see Duarte and Sabonis, who had a really good relationship back in Indiana? Are we going to see Vezenkov and Trey Lyles as your 4 and 5 combo? Are we going to see Keegan Murray at the 3? Are we going to see Fox and Monk, or Fox and Mitchell, or Monk and Mitchell, or Monk and Herter? There are so many different combinations that Mike Brown has available to him, and he's going to use that time. He's going to use preseason, and he's going to use training camp to try out those different pairings and see which ones he's thinking of and kind of leaning heavily upon. I am fascinated to see which pairings he favors, and I'm fascinated to see which pairings just work well together. Like, I'm really, really anxious to see Vezenkov and Sabonis specifically on the floor together, or Vezenkov, Sabonis, and Fox on the floor together. How much does that open up Vezenkov's game on the perimeter, having those two with all the attention that's upon them? And with Vezenkov and Fox and Sabonis out there, does that open up opportunities for Keegan Murray or Kevin Herter on the perimeter as well? Like, I'm very excited to see how lineup combinations open up this offense to an even bigger and to a new level. And how Mike Brown, what pairings he focuses on, which ones he looks at, which ones are not going to work, because there are going to be some that he throws out there that we're just like, doesn't really work, and which ones maybe surprise us with how well they work. Can't wait to see that and to follow that during training camp. So that's my main storyline from training camp. Another one, an obvious one. It's kind of a storyline that we were looking at last year too, although after the playoffs, maybe there's even more of a focus on it. It's Domantas Sabonis' jumper. Last year, it was more like his three-point jumper, right? He worked a lot, not this offseason, but the past offseason, on that three-point shot. And at times, it looked good during the regular season. He still was a below-average three-point shooter, which the Kings would love for that to improve, but I guess that's kind of to be expected for Sabonis. He's not just going to suddenly become a great three-point shooter. But that mid-range jumper, that open jumper that the Golden State Warriors were giving him in the playoffs, it's not just him hitting a higher percentage of those, because a couple episodes ago, I broke down the numbers and showed that actually Sabonis is a pretty solid, percentage-wise, a pretty solid mid-range shooter. It's just the volume is not necessarily there. The Golden State Warriors demanded a higher volume of Sabonis. They demanded more shots. They gave him more looks from mid-range, and clearly he was hesitant to take those shots. Is he less hesitant? Is he willing to shoot at a higher volume? Does that higher percentage or solid percentage carry over into a higher volume? Those are going to be things to pay attention to, and it's going to be interesting to see how much the Kings intentionally try and isolate Sabonis during training camp and during preseason so that he gets the opportunity to incorporate that into his game, or at least show that off or become a little more comfortable. Maybe send that message to opposing defenses like, if you give me this shot, I'm going to take it, and I'm going to knock it down to where you can't give me this shot anymore. Storyline number 3, Keegan Murray. Keegan Murray shooting. Keegan Murray scoring. What does Keegan Murray look like putting the ball on the floor and creating for himself? We saw the amazing California Classic version of Keegan Murray, right, where he was the guy, and he was putting the ball on the floor and scoring, 40 points or whatever it was. Like, we saw that version of Keegan, and it looked amazing. Was it 50? I honestly don't remember. I was on a cruise ship at the time. Forgive me. But, like, Keegan, we know Keegan went off in both California Classic games. We know he's been working all offseason with De'Aaron Fox. So what does that look like against main roster competition? I would love to see Keegan Murray get opportunity as the guy on the bench squad. Of course Keegan's going to start. But think about this for a second. Let's say the Kings are doing 5-on-5. Put 4 starters out there and Sasha Vezenkov, and then have Keegan with the other bench 4, with Malik and with Davion and with Trey Lyles. Have him with those guys and Chris Duarte. That way, Keegan is kind of forced with that group to be that go-to scorer, even though Malik is capable of doing that. Then have Fox and Murray with bench players against 3 starters and 2 bench players, and see what that looks like with Keegan still kind of as an offensive focus. I really want to see Keegan Murray as that aggressive, I'm going to create my own shot. I am going to score the basketball, not just catch and shoot threes, which he's going to still get in abundance in the Kings offensive system, but whether it's an ISO or through the flow of the offense, I'm going to put the ball on the ground, I'm going to score, or I'm going to get to the foul line. What does that look like against first string starting and bench competition in the NBA? That's a major storyline. And then finally, of course, team defense. Again, I don't think team defense should be the number one focus for the Sacramento Kings in training camp. I don't. Something they're definitely going to address, something they're definitely going to look to work on. Does the team defense look different? Are we seeing the Kings maybe implementing zone more at times? Are we seeing better defensive communication? Are we seeing more full court pressure, which, of course, Doug Christie loves, Kings assistant coach Doug Christie? Like, what is there anything different with the team defense? That's really what we're going to be paying attention to. Does this team, for one, I expect them to look more locked in, to look more energized. That just comes with being fresh at the beginning of the season, being excited in training camp, fighting for positions, fighting for minutes. Like, I expect the defensive battles in training camp to be pretty intense. And maybe the effort in preseason at times, and certainly in the first couple weeks of the season, you expect a high defensive effort and a high defensive work rate. That's not necessarily 100% sustainable over the course of the season, but I expect that. It's not necessarily the effort that I'm looking for, it's the philosophies. What are the Kings implementing? Is there something new, or is it just more of the same, but now with the expectation of it being better because this team has been together longer? Is there a new level of accountability from Mike Brown? Is there more defensive leadership from a guy like De'Aaron Fox, or from Davion Mitchell, or from Malik Monk, or whoever it may be? That's what I'm looking for. So those are my 4 main storylines from training camp to pay attention to, and we will revisit them as training camp goes on. Again, it's lineup combinations and rotations, Domantas Sabonis' jumper, Keegan Murray's scoring, and team defense. If you have a storyline that you would like to add to that list, or something you're definitely paying attention to during training camp, let me know. You can reach me on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here. Thank goodness. It helps us kill the time before the NBA regular season begins. And whether it's betting on the NFL, betting on the NBA, the WNBA playoffs going on right now, the baseball MLB playoffs that are soon to come, whatever it may be, sports betting on FanDuel is the number one place to do it. It's America's number one sportsbook for a reason. And right now, new customers can get, or who bet $5 will get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. You place a $5 bet, whether you win it or you lose it, $200 in bonus bets right there for you to play with, so you can either make that money back or build onto that winnings that you already started. And you can make those bets on anything from player props to spreads and more. And check this out. In addition to that incredible deal of $200 of bonus bets, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube and YouTube TV. That is an incredible deal right there. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with an offer that you do not want to miss out on. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. So some of you might be confused, going, Matt, there's also, since you last recorded a podcast, the Jordan Ford news. The Sacramento Kings have issued Jordan Ford their final 2-way contract. That was something that I thought was going to happen and had wanted to happen since the beginning of the offseason. Talked about that a lot. Since after his performance at Summer League, I was like, give the final 2-way spot to Jordan Ford. Well, I'm very glad they finally did that. I'm going to talk more about that next week, not because I'm delaying it, not because I don't have time to, but because I am doing, for ABC 10, I have a sit-down interview with Jordan Ford's head coach at Folsom High School here in the Sacramento area. Jordan Ford was a local kid. He just signed his first official NBA contract with his hometown team. So the storylines, the local storylines alone with Jordan Ford are amazing. So I'm doing that interview on Tuesday. I'm expecting that Tuesday evening or afternoon to release a Locked On Kings podcast where at the beginning I'll talk about Jordan Ford getting that 2-way spot, why I think it's a great deal and what I expect kind of from Jordan. And then I'll have the interview with his high school head coach at Folsom High School, as part of that show as well. So make sure you tune in on Tuesday for that episode. Looking forward to that. Again, that's also going to be recorded for ABC 10, where you might have noticed at the beginning of the show, those of you who listen to me regularly know that my intro is pretty much the same every single time. And I always try and briefly list out my titles and get that out of the way so we can actually get to content. But my title has changed. That's because I secured a promotion at ABC 10 that I'm very excited about, very proud of. I am now the sports anchor and one of their reporters, or it's called an MSJ. But I'm one of their reporters here at ABC 10, which is a big deal for me. I initially was working as a just sports producer and kind of reporter. A lot of what I'm doing is going to be the exact same. It's just to the next level, which is amazing for me and amazing for my career. And it has absolutely zero impact on Locked On Kings. I'm still going to be doing Locked On Kings, post-game episodes from the arena on home games, post-game episodes probably here from the studio or from my home after road games, unless I'm traveling on the road, which hopefully I'll have even more opportunity to travel with the team and cover the team on the road this season. So it's a really, really big deal for me. Those of you who have been with me over the last 6 years that I've been hosting Locked On Kings know kind of my journey through Sacramento, the mistakes I've made, the opportunities I've had, the accomplishments that I've had as well, going from radio to television, from college, a college internship, all the way to where I'm at today. It's been a crazy journey. It's been a fun journey. And I'm blessed to turn the passion that I have for covering sports, and particularly for the Sacramento Kings, into the career that I have. So very thankful, very blessed for that. And again, no impact to Locked On Kings whatsoever. We're continuing. We're going forward. You can't get rid of me that easily, Locked On. I'm very excited for the future at both ABC 10 and at Locked On Kings. Well, thank you so much for your support. As always, again, share with me any other major training camp storylines that you have. And if you want to share your thoughts on the decision to say goodbye to Queta and Nerlens Noel and commit to JaVale, McGee, and Alex Len, feel free to comment on that as well. And please join me for Tuesday's episode of Locked On Kings next week. I'm talking more about Jordan Ford. I have more great content coming for you. I plan on doing an episode Monday as well, more interviews and stuff like that. It's going to be a busy week for me next week. I'll also on Thursday be going for ABC 10 and covering the San Francisco 49ers home opener against the New York Giants. So I might do a podcast with my partner, Kevin John, while we're driving to that game. You never know. It's fun. We're getting closer and closer to the NBA season. I hope you will continue to join me for great content here on Locked On Kings. Until next time, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.